The night was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and the distant echoes of sirens wailing through the city streets. Street lights flickered like weary sentinels standing guard over the crumbling neighborhood, casting long, ghostly shadows along the alleyways. Inside a small, run-down apartment on the third floor of an aging brick building, 12-year-old twins Jaden and Jordan sat huddled together on the floor. Their eyes locked onto the clock on the wall. Their mother, Tamara, should have been home by now. Tamara had always been cautious. She knew the streets were dangerous, especially at night, but that evening, she had been forced to stay late at the diner where she worked, picking up an extra shift to make enough money for their rent. When she finally walked through the door, her uniform wrinkled and her hair damp from the light drizzle outside. She barely had time to drop her keys onto the table before she noticed the worried looks on her sons' faces. "You boys need to stop waiting up for me," she said softly, forcing a tired smile. "It's not safe to be awake this late." Jaden and Jordan exchanged a glance but said nothing. They knew their mother was doing her best, but the fear in their eyes spoke volumes. They lived in a neighborhood ruled by crime, where gunshots in the distance were as common as car horns, and survival meant knowing when to run and when to hide. Just as Tamara reached for a glass of water, there was a knock at the door. A sharp, deliberate sound that sent a chill crawling up her spine. She froze, her fingers tightening around the glass. It was late, too late for visitors. She turned her head slowly toward the door, then back at her sons, silently motioning for them to stay quiet. Another knock, louder this time. Jaden and Jordan held their breath as Tamara stepped cautiously toward the door. She hesitated, pressing her ear against the wood. "Who is it?" she called out, her voice steady but firm. No answer. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Then, without warning, the door burst open, the rusty lock giving way with a sickening crack. A dark figure surged inside, his face hidden beneath the hood of his jacket. Tamara barely had time to react before the man grabbed her by the arm and shoved her against the wall. Jaden and Jordan screamed as their mother struggled, kicking and clawing at her attacker. The man hissed a warning, pressing something cold and metallic against her ribs. "You should have kept your mouth shut, Tamara," he snarled. The boys knew exactly who he was, one of the men from the corner. The ones their mother had always told them to stay away from. He was part of the gang that controlled their block, the same gang their mother had tried to report to the police. Tamara gasped as the knife pressed deeper. "Please," she whispered. "I was only trying to protect my kids." The man didn't hesitate. With one swift movement, he drove the blade forward. Jaden and Jordan could do nothing but watch as their mother collapsed onto the floor, blood spilling across the faded carpet. The man stepped back, his breathing ragged, before turning his gaze toward the twins. "Stay quiet, or you'll be next." Then he was gone, slipping back into the darkness like a phantom. For a moment, silence swallowed the room, broken only by the ragged breathing of the two boys as they crawled toward their mother. "Mom?" Jaden choked out, shaking her shoulder. Her lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "Run." Tears streamed down their faces as they realized the truth. She wasn't going to make it. And if they stayed, neither would they. Grabbing Jordan's hand, Jaden stumbled toward the door, their mother's final word ringing in his ears. "Run." And so they did. Ethan Carter sat in his patrol car, the engine humming beneath him as he stared out into the rain-drenched streets. It had been another long night, and he was counting the minutes until his shift was over. The city was a lost cause, and he had stopped believing he could make a difference a long time ago. He had once been an idealist, a young officer eager to serve and protect. But after years of witnessing the same cycle of crime and corruption, something inside him had hardened. He wasn't a hero. He was just another cop, patrolling the same streets where nothing ever changed. As he reached for his coffee, a sudden movement caught his attention. Two figures, small, fast, racing across the street. He barely had time to register them before they pounded on his car window. "Help, please, you have to help us." It was two kids, their clothes damp from the rain, their eyes wide with terror. For a moment, Ethan hesitated. He had seen this before, kids in trouble, looking for someone to save them. But the city had taught him that getting involved only led to disappointment. Still, something about the desperation in their voices made him pause. He rolled down the window slightly. "What's going on?" They "They killed our mom." One of them stammered. "We don't know what to do." Ethan frowned, glancing around the street. No signs of immediate danger. No gunfire. No screaming. It could have been a setup. Some kind of distraction for a robbery. Or it could have been real. He exhaled sharply. "Get in." The boys didn't hesitate. They scrambled into the backseat, their breath hitching with barely contained sobs. Ethan shifted into drive, his grip tightening on the wheel. He didn't know why he was doing this. He had stopped caring a long time ago. But as he glanced in the rearview mirror, meeting the terrified eyes of the two children, he realized something. Maybe, just maybe, tonight was different. The police station was colder than usual that night. Or maybe it just felt that way to Jaden and Jordan as they sat on the hard bench. Still shaking from the shock, Ethan stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching them carefully. He had called it in, reported the incident, but something about the situation gnawed at him. The twins were silent now, their eyes hollow. Ethan knew that look. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror years ago. After he had lost his own family. He clenched his jaw and looked away. He wasn't supposed to care. But for the first time in years, he did. Ethan decided to look into the case himself. What he found sent a chill down his spine. Tamara had been trying to expose something bigger, a network of dirty cops working with the very gang that had killed her. And now, two kids were the only witnesses left. Ethan knew what that meant. They weren't safe. And neither was he. Ethan had been a cop long enough to know when something felt off. In this case, this entire situation reeked of something much bigger than a random act of street violence. As he sat at his desk that night, flipping through old reports, his gut told him that Tamara's death wasn't just a robbery gone wrong or a petty crime. It was an execution. The police records on Tamara Jefferson were thin. But there was one detail that stood out. She had reported illegal activity happening in her neighborhood just a month ago. Drug dealing, extortion, and even police officers taking bribes from local gangs. Ethan read through her statement twice, his eyes narrowing at the names listed. Sergeant Daniel McAllister. He recognized the name immediately. McAllister wasn't just another cop, he was Ethan's superior. The man who had been on the force for over 20 years. Respected by many but whispered about in dark corners. Ethan had never trusted him. But he had never had proof of his corruption. Now, it seemed, he had stumbled upon something dangerous. A knock on the door made him stiffen. "Detective Carter." A voice called from the other side. It was Officer Jameson, a rookie on the force. Ethan hesitated before unlocking the door. Jameson stepped inside, closing it behind him. His face was tense. "I heard you brought in two kids tonight. Said their mom was killed?" Ethan studied him carefully before nodding. "Yeah, why?" Jameson lowered his voice. "Word is, McAllister isn't happy about it. The gang that runs that neighborhood, they've got connections. Deep ones. If those kids saw something they weren't supposed to, they're in trouble." Ethan clenched his jaw. He already knew that, but hearing it out loud made it real. "Where are they now?" Jameson asked. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't trust anyone, not yet. Jameson sighed. "Look, Carter, I don't know what's going on. But if I were you, I'd be careful. Some people don't want this case solved." The message was clear. The warning had been delivered. As Jameson left, Ethan looked at the case file again. If McAllister really was involved, then Tamara had been silenced. And now, two kids were the only loose ends. Which meant they weren't safe. And neither was he. Jaden and Jordan barely slept that night. Even though they were inside the police station. Something about the way the officers looked at them made their skin crawl. They could feel it, the stares, the murmurs, the tension in the air. They weren't safe here. Jaden nudged his brother. "We need to get out of here." Jordan frowned. "But that cop, Ethan, he helped us." Jaden hesitated. Ethan had let them sit in his office instead of the cold holding area. He had given them food, water. He hadn't treated them like criminals. But Jaden also knew how the world worked. Cops could be bought. Trusting the wrong person could get you killed. Before he could say anything else, the door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, his face unreadable. He crouched down in front of them. "You two are coming with me," he said. Jaden stiffened. "Why?" "Because if you stay here, you won't make it until morning." The words sent a chill down both boys' spines. Ethan looked over his shoulder before motioning for them to follow. "We don't have time," he muttered. Jaden and Jordan exchanged a glance before quickly getting up. Ethan led them out of the station through a back exit. Rain was still falling lightly. The streets nearly empty. His car was parked in the shadows of an alley. "Get in," he ordered. The boys hesitated. Ethan sighed. "I know you don't trust me. You shouldn't, but right now, I'm the only one who's not trying to kill you. So get in the damn car." That was enough for Jaden. He grabbed his brother's arm, and they both climbed into the backseat. As Ethan pulled onto the road, a black SUV turned the corner behind them. The headlights flared to life. And then, the SUV sped toward them. "Shit," Ethan muttered, hitting the gas. The chase had begun. The tires screeched against the wet pavement as Ethan swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding a collision with a parked car. The SUV behind them didn't slow down. Jaden clutched the seat, his heart pounding. "They're following us." Ethan didn't answer. He already knew. Another sharp turn. The SUV gained on them. A gunshot rang out, shattering the back window. Jordan screamed as glass rained down around them. "Get down," Ethan barked, gripping the wheel tighter. The boys ducked low, their hands over their heads. Ethan knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He needed an advantage. He made a sudden turn down an alley, slamming the brakes at the last second. The SUV shot past the entrance before screeching to a halt. Ethan didn't wait. He threw the car into reverse and sped out in the opposite direction. For a moment, there was silence. Then, "They're turning around," Jaden whispered, peeking over the seat. Ethan exhaled sharply. He had bought them a few seconds. But it wasn't enough. He needed a plan. His mind raced. He couldn't take the kids to his apartment. It was the first place they'd check. The station was compromised. There was only one person he could trust. He grabbed his phone and dialed a number. "Samantha, I need a favor." Samantha Riley was already waiting by the time Ethan pulled into the underground garage of an old apartment building. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and had the kind of presence that made people think twice before messing with her. A former detective, she had left the force 2 years ago after calling out corruption in the department. Now, she worked as a private investigator. But she still had ties to the police. She folded her arms as Ethan got out of the car. "You sure know how to pick your messes. Carter." Ethan gestured to the backseat. "2 kids, witnesses to a murder. Someone wants them dead." Samantha's gaze softened as she looked at Jaden and Jordan. They were scared but trying to hide it. She nodded. "Bring them inside." The apartment was small but secure, with reinforced locks and blackout curtains. Ethan turned to the boys. "You're safe here. For now." Jaden still looked wary. "Who is she?" "Samantha. She's a friend," Ethan said. Samantha crouched down to their level. "You boys have been through hell. But I promise, we're not going to let anything happen to you." Jaden studied her for a long moment before nodding. Ethan exhaled. "We need to figure out our next move. Fast." Samantha glanced at him. "You know they won't stop coming, right?" Ethan met her gaze. "Yeah, because now, it wasn't just about 2 kids. It was about uncovering a truth that had been buried for too long. And bringing down the people who had let it fester." Ethan sat at Samantha's kitchen table, his hands clasped together as he stared at the scattered documents before him. He had spent the last hour going through the files she had pulled up, records, witness statements, and case reports that had mysteriously disappeared from the official system. Tamara Jefferson's name had appeared in a handful of police complaints, most of them buried under bureaucratic nonsense, ignored by officers who had been bought off or too afraid to take action. The gang that ran the neighborhood, known as the Hollow Serpents, was more than just a group of street criminals. They were a business: drugs, extortion, weapons, and human trafficking. And from what Ethan could tell, their influence reached deep into law enforcement. His stomach twisted as he read through the documents. There was no doubt about it. McAllister had been working with them for years. Samantha sat across from him, flipping through another folder. "This goes deeper than we thought." Tamara wasn't just reporting low-level dealers. She had evidence, photographs, recordings, proving that McAllister was feeding information to the Serpents. That's why she was killed. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "And now those kids are the only witnesses left." Samantha nodded grimly. "Which means McAllister won't stop until they're dead." In the next room, Jaden and Jordan sat on the couch, their eyes darting between the walls and the windows. as if expecting danger to burst through at any moment. They were quiet, too quiet for kids their age. The kind of silence that only came from seeing too much. Too soon. Ethan stood and walked over, kneeling down in front of them. I need you two to tell me everything you remember about that night. Anything your mom might have told you before it happened. Jaden hesitated, his jaw tightening. She was scared, he said finally. She kept saying she had to do the right thing, even if it meant putting herself in danger. Jordan looked down. She said she had proof. But we don't know where it is. Ethan exchanged a glance with Samantha. If Tamara had hidden the evidence somewhere, it could be the key to taking McAllister down. But that also meant they weren't the only ones looking for it. Ethan's grip tightened on the armrest. Then we need to find it before they do. McAllister sat in his dimly lit office, his fingers tapping against the desk as he listened to the man on the other end of the phone. They got away, the voice reported. Carter took them. McAllister's lips curled into a sneer. Of course he did. That idiot never knows when to leave things alone. He leaned back, rolling his shoulders. Ethan Carter was an inconvenience. But he was also predictable. He had been a good cop once, the kind of man who believed in justice, who played by the rules. That was what made him weak. McAllister turned his chair toward the window, staring out at the city below. Find them, and this time, don't miss. He hung up and exhaled slowly. If those kids had any idea where Tamara had hidden the evidence, he needed to silence them before Carter figured it out. And if that meant putting a bullet in an old colleague's head, so be it. The first sign that something was wrong came in the form of a black sedan parked across the street. Ethan spotted it through the window. The way the engine hummed despite no one getting out. The way the driver kept glancing toward Samantha's building. They had been found. Ethan's body went on autopilot. We need to move. Now. Samantha barely had time to react before Ethan was already ushering the boys toward the back door. Go to the car. Don't look back. Jaden and Jordan didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the stairwell while Samantha grabbed her bag. Where are we going? Anywhere but here, Ethan muttered, pulling his gun from his holster. The first bullet shattered the front window before he could even reach the door. Glass exploded inward as Samantha ducked, pulling her own weapon. Shit. Another shot rang out, then another. The sedan's doors burst open, and two men in dark clothing stepped out, guns raised. Ethan fired first, dropping one before the other could take aim. Samantha took out the second. But there were more coming. Ethan grabbed Samantha's arm and pulled her toward the alleyway where the boys were waiting. Car. Now. Samantha jumped into the driver's seat while Ethan climbed in next to her. The second she turned the key, tires screeched behind them. The black SUV from before was back. Ethan looked back at Jaden and Jordan. Stay down. Samantha gunned the engine, the car jerking forward as they sped into the night. The SUV followed, its headlights cutting through the rain. Ethan gritted his teeth. They're not letting up. Samantha didn't answer. She turned sharply onto a side street, barely missing a delivery truck. The SUV followed, gaining speed. We need to lose them, she muttered. Ethan's mind raced. He reached for his gun. Keep driving. He rolled down the window, the wind slamming into his face as he took aim. The first shot hit the SUV's hood. The second hit the front tire. The vehicle swerved, struggling to regain control. Then it slammed into a parked car. Samantha didn't slow down. She kept driving until the city lights blurred into the distance. Ethan finally exhaled, turning to the boys. You okay? Jaden nodded. Jordan was still shaking. Samantha glanced at Ethan. We can't run forever. No, Ethan agreed, which is why we're going to end this. By the time they reached the abandoned storage unit on the outskirts of town, the adrenaline was still coursing through Ethan's veins. Jaden and Jordan stood in the center of the room, looking small against the rows of rusted metal lockers. This is where my mom used to bring us sometimes, Jaden murmured. Ethan scanned the area. If she hid the evidence somewhere, it would be here. They split up, searching through the units, checking old boxes, overturning anything that seemed out of place. It was Jordan who found it. A small, metal box, hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. Is this it? Ethan took it from him, carefully prying it open. Inside was a flash drive, along with a folded piece of paper. Samantha leaned in, reading the note aloud. If anything happens to me, this is the truth. Don't let them win. Ethan clenched his jaw, pocketing the drive. McAllister had killed Tamara to keep this hidden. But now, they had it. And Ethan was going to make damn sure the world saw it. Ethan stared at the small flash drive resting in his palm, feeling the weight of what it contained. Tamara had risked everything to expose the truth. And now it was in his hands. He turned it over in his fingers, his mind racing through the possibilities. If the evidence on this drive was as damning as he suspected, McAllister and his entire corrupt network would do anything to make sure it never saw the light of day. Samantha sat on the edge of a rusted metal cabinet, arms crossed. So, what's the plan? We have the evidence, but we can't exactly walk into the precinct and hand it over. McAllister owns half the department. Ethan exhaled. We need to see what's on it first. If it's strong enough, we take it to someone outside the force. The feds, maybe. Jaden and Jordan were still standing nearby, their eyes filled with questions but too exhausted to ask. They had been running for days, and the weight of what they had been through was finally catching up to them. Ethan crouched in front of them. You two did good. Your mom would be proud. Jaden bit his lip, his hands clenched into fists. She tried to stop them, and they killed her. His voice was barely a whisper. You're going to stop them, right? Ethan met his gaze. I swear to you, I will. Samantha tapped the laptop she had set up on a crate. Then let's find out what we're working with. Ethan inserted the flash drive, and the screen flickered to life. A series of folders popped up, recordings, transaction logs, emails. The files were meticulously organized, each one painting a damning picture of the corruption running through the city's veins. But it was the video that made Ethan's stomach twist. Tamara had recorded a meeting, one between McAllister and a high-ranking member of the Hollow Serpents. The conversation was brief but damning. McAllister's voice was clear. As long as I'm in charge, your shipments will move without a problem. But if she keeps poking around, make sure she disappears. No loose ends. The video ended. Silence filled the room. Jordan was trembling. He ordered them to kill her. Ethan shut the laptop. His fists curled. Yeah, and now, we're going to make him pay. The weight of what they had just seen pressed down on them like an unbearable force. Samantha leaned against the wall, pinching the bridge of her nose. This is it. This is what we need. But the second we make a move, McAllister will know. Ethan's mind was already working through scenarios. We need to be smart. If we just send this to the wrong person, it disappears. We have to make it public. Samantha frowned. How public are we talking? Ethan's eyes flickered toward the boys. As public as possible. News outlets, independent journalists, people who don't answer to anyone. Samantha nodded. I know a guy at Channel 7. He's clean. If we get this to him, it's going on the air. Ethan grabbed his gun, checking the magazine. Then we move now. As they prepared to leave, the sound of screeching tires echoed through the abandoned storage lot. Samantha cursed. They found us. Ethan's instincts kicked in. Get the kids out of here. I'll hold them off. Jaden grabbed his arm. No, you can't. Ethan squeezed his shoulder. I promised I'd keep you safe. Now go. Samantha ushered the boys toward the back exit as Ethan drew his gun and moved toward the entrance. The first shot rang out before he even reached the door. The bullet slammed into the wall inches from his head. He ducked behind a stack of crates, returning fire. He counted at least 4 of them, moving quickly through the shadows. McAllister wasn't playing games anymore. Ethan aimed and fired, dropping one of the men. The others hesitated, giving him a second to reposition. But they weren't his concern. Keeping those boys alive was. As he fired again, he saw Samantha and the kids slipping through the back door. He just needed to buy them time. A bullet grazed his shoulder, sending a sharp pain searing through his body. He grit his teeth, forcing himself to stay upright. Then, the sound of an engine roared through the night. Samantha. She had the boys in the car. Ethan took one last shot before sprinting toward the vehicle. Samantha hit the gas the second he jumped in. Bullets ricocheted off the back of the car. But they were already gone. They drove in silence, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Ethan pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder. Wincing, Jaden and Jordan sat in the back, eyes wide, still shaken. Samantha gripped the wheel. We can't keep running. He'll never stop. Ethan nodded. We're not running anymore. He turned to the boys. We're going to end this. But I need you two to trust me. Can you do that? Jaden swallowed hard. then nodded. Ethan looked at Samantha. Get us to Channel 7. It was risky, but they had no choice. They needed to get the evidence out before McAllister's people could bury it. As they drove, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Blocked number. He hesitated before answering. McAllister's voice oozed through the speaker. You just couldn't let it go. Could you? Ethan's grip tightened. Your days are numbered. McAllister chuckled darkly. You think a little flash drive is going to take me down? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Ethan's jaw clenched. Neither do you. McAllister's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You have something of mine. And I have something of yours. Ethan's blood ran cold. McAllister continued. You didn't think I'd just let you waltz out of town, did you? I always have a backup plan. The call ended. Samantha glanced at him. What the hell was that? Ethan's stomach twisted. He has someone. By the time they reached the Channel 7 building, Ethan's mind was racing. Who had McAllister taken? A cop? A journalist? Or worse, someone Ethan cared about. Samantha's contact, a journalist named Ray Navarro, met them at the entrance. His eyes widened when he saw Ethan's bleeding shoulder and the terrified kids. Jesus, Carter, what the hell did you bring to my doorstep? Ethan shoved the flash drive into his hand. The biggest story of your career. Ray hesitated, then nodded. Come inside. They followed him through the building, heading toward the news control room. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. If this broadcasted, there was no turning back. But before they could step inside, his phone buzzed again. A picture message. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. It was a live photo. Someone tied to a chair. Blood dripping from their temple. Samantha looked over his shoulder. Who is that? Ethan's entire body went rigid. His old partner, Jameson. McAllister had him. And now, Ethan had a choice. Save the man who had warned him. Or expose the truth before it was too late. Ethan stared at the photo on his phone, his fingers tightening around the device until his knuckles turned white. McAllister had Jameson. The man had put himself at risk to warn Ethan, and now he was paying the price. Ethan knew what this was, leverage. A warning. McAllister wanted to force Ethan into silence. Ray Navarro, the journalist, stood nearby, watching with concern. What's going on? Ethan exhaled sharply, shoving his phone into his pocket. McAllister has my old partner. If we go through with this broadcast, he'll kill him. Samantha cursed under her breath. Damn it, he knows we have the evidence. Ray hesitated. If you want to hold off. No, Ethan cut in. We air it, now. Jaden and Jordan flinched at the sharpness in his voice. But Ethan wasn't going to stop. McAllister wanted him to play by his rules. To let fear dictate his actions. But that's exactly why people like him thrived, because others were too afraid to stand up. Ray glanced at the flash drive in his hand. Then back at Ethan. This is going to put a target on all of us. We already have one, Samantha muttered. Ethan looked at Ray. Get it on air, as soon as possible. Ray nodded and turned toward the newsroom. As he walked away, Ethan checked his phone again. A new message had come through. Come alone, no cops. You have 1 hour. Ethan's jaw tightened. Samantha saw the message over his shoulder. You're not actually thinking of going, are you? Ethan looked at her, his face hard. I can't leave Jameson to die. Samantha's eyes narrowed. So what? You just walk into a trap? McAllister isn't going to let you walk away. I know, Ethan said. Samantha cursed again. Damn it, Carter. She ran a hand through her hair. Exhaling. Fine, but you're not going alone. Ethan shook his head. I have to. Jaden suddenly spoke up, his voice small but firm. You don't. You're not alone. Ethan looked at him. Then Jordan. They had lost everything because of McAllister. And yet, they were still standing. Samantha exhaled sharply. We're not going to let you get yourself killed. Ethan looked at her for a long moment before nodding. They had a plan to make. The meeting point was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was the perfect place for a kill, isolated. Quiet, no cameras. Ethan drove alone, his gun resting on the passenger seat. He had a plan, but there were no guarantees. As he pulled up to the entrance, 2 men flanked his car, their weapons already drawn. One of them knocked on the window. Get out. Ethan stepped out slowly, raising his hands just enough to show he wasn't holding a weapon yet. They frisked him, taking his gun before leading him inside. Jameson was there, tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was bruised, blood trickling from a cut on his temple. McAllister stood nearby, his suit crisp, his expression calm, too calm. You just don't know when to quit, do you, Carter? McAllister mused. Ethan's eyes flickered between him and Jameson. Let him go. McAllister chuckled. You still think you're in a position to make demands? Ethan didn't respond. He had already counted 5 armed men in the room, all watching him like hawks. McAllister sighed. You were a good cop once. Ethan, if you had just kept your head down, you wouldn't be in this mess. Ethan's lip curled. If I had kept my head down, those boys would be dead. Their mother's killer would still be walking free. McAllister's expression darkened. You think you've won? He gestured at Jameson. I can put a bullet in his head right now. Ethan tensed. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. Then, a sudden explosion of noise. Gunfire erupted from the warehouse entrance. McAllister's men spun around, raising their weapons. Samantha. She had followed through. Bullets whizzed through the air as chaos broke out. Ethan didn't hesitate. He lunged for the nearest gunman, wrestling the weapon from his hands and turning it on him. The man crumpled to the ground. Jameson groaned, trying to move. Ethan rushed to him, cutting the ropes binding his wrists. We need to move. Jameson staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his temple. McAllister was backing away, his expression turning from confidence to fury. You son of a... Ethan raised his gun. It's over. McAllister's jaw clenched. You think this changes anything? Ethan pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through McAllister's shoulder, sending him to the ground. More sirens wailed in the distance. Samantha's backup had arrived. It really was over. The footage aired that night. Every news station picked up the story. The evidence from Tamara's flash drive was played on national television. McAllister's voice. His corruption. His deals with the Hollow Serpents. By morning, he had been arrested, but the fallout was bigger than that. Several high-ranking officers were implicated. Arrests were made. The city had been shaken to its core. Ethan sat in a hospital room, his shoulder bandaged, watching the news play out. Jaden and Jordan sat beside him, both quiet but watching. Samantha walked in, a small smile on her lips. It worked. Ethan nodded. For the first time in a long time, something had actually changed, but there was still one thing left to do. The adoption papers were laid out in front of him. Jaden and Jordan watched in stunned silence as Ethan signed his name. It had taken weeks of legal battles, but finally, they were safe. No more running, no more hiding. Ethan looked at them. What do you think? Jaden's throat bobbed. You really want us? Ethan reached out, gripping his shoulder. I already chose you. Jordan wiped at his eyes. Does this mean we're family? Ethan's chest tightened. Yeah, it does. For the first time since their mother had died. Jaden and Jordan smiled. Ethan had lost so much in his life. But now, he had something worth fighting for. And he would never let them go.